The rain came down in sheets that October morning in 1873, turning the field into a churning mess of mud and water. And Nora Lawson gripped the plow handles so hard her knuckles had gone white beneath the streaming wet. Her dress clung to her body, heavy with rain, and her dark hair had escaped its pins to hang in sodden ropes down her back. The mule was fighting her, skittering sideways in the muck, and she could feel the burn in her shoulders from trying to keep the blades straight. 3 months since Thomas had died, thrown from a spooked horse that shattered his skull against a rock, and the farm would not wait for her grief to pass. She did not hear the rider approach over the drumming rain. One moment she was alone in her struggle, and the next a tall figure in a drenched coat was there beside her, reaching for the reins without a word. Nora gasped and stepped back, losing her grip on the plow handles. The man did not look at her. He simply took hold of the leather straps and spoke low to the mule, his voice too quiet for her to hear but somehow commanding. The animal settled immediately. "What do you think you are doing?" Nora demanded, finding her voice though it came out hoarse from disuse. She had not spoken to another soul in 2 days. The stranger still did not turn. He clicked his tongue at the mule and began guiding it forward, the plow cutting through the earth in a clean, straight line. Nora stood in the rain, watching this man work her field as though he had every right to be there. He was broad-shouldered beneath the wet coat, and she could see dark hair curling at his collar beneath a hat that had seen better days. "I asked you a question," she said, louder now, moving to keep pace beside him. "Rain is going to stop soon," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Ground will be too hard tomorrow, needs to be done now. That is my decision to make." He guided the mule through a turn with practiced ease. "Saw you from the road. Mule was about to bolt. You would have been dragged or worse." Nora felt heat rise to her face despite the cold rain. She knew he was right. She had been losing control, but that did not give this stranger permission to simply take over. Still, watching him work, she found she could not quite muster the energy to fight. Her arms ached, her whole body ached. The plow moved steadily through the field now, doing in minutes what would have taken her an hour of struggle. "I do not need charity," she said, not offering it. "Offering help. Different things." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how the wet dress outlined her figure. The stranger kept his eyes on the work, as though sensing her discomfort. They continued in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the rain and the squelch of the plow through mud. "What is your name?" Nora finally asked. "Russell Webb." "You are just passing through, Mr. Webb," was planning to. He guided the mule through another turn. The field was more than half done now. Heading down to Petaluma, California, to meet a man about work. Petaluma was only 6 miles south. Nora lived on the outskirts, where the land stretched out in rolling hills that were good for farming when you had enough hands to work it. She and Thomas had managed barely, but alone it was impossible. "Well, I thank you for your help, but I can manage from here," she said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Russell Webb finally looked at her then. He had a weathered face, probably 30 years to her 24, with gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was no judgment in his expression, only a kind of quiet assessment. "You have stock to feed?" he asked. 2 milk cows, some chickens." "The mule." "Firewood laid in for winter." Nora lifted her chin. "I am not your concern, Mr. Webb. That is not an answer, Mrs. Lawson. And no, it is not an answer because I do not owe you one." He nodded slowly and turned back to the work. "Fair enough." They finished the field as the rain began to taper off, just as he had predicted. Russell guided the mule to the small barn at the edge of the property and began unhitching the plow with efficient movements. Nora stood in the barn doorway, dripping onto the hay-strewn floor, watching him. You know your way around a farm, she observed. Grew up on one, Nebraska. He removed the mule's harness and began rubbing the animal down with a piece of sacking. You should get inside, get dry. Going to catch your death standing there. This is my barn. Yes, madam. There was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice, though his face remained serious. Nora felt a sudden, irrational urge to cry. This stranger had shown her more kindness in an hour than anyone in town had shown since Thomas died. The neighbors had brought food for the first week, offered condolences, and then gone back to their own lives. She was the young widow now, the object of pity and speculation. Some of the women whispered that she would have to sell, that a woman alone could not possibly manage. Some of the men looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl, as though her husband's death had made her available property. I have stew, she heard herself say. It is not much, but you should eat before you go on to Petaluma. Russell paused in his work, glancing at her again. That is kind of you, Mrs. Lawson. It is the least I can do. The house was small but well built, 2 rooms with a loft above. Thomas had been a good carpenter, better at that than farming if she was honest. Nora busied herself at the stove, glad for something to do with her hands while Russell stood politely by the door, his coat dripping onto the floor. You can hang that by the fire, she said without looking at him. She heard him move, heard the wet coat being draped over a chair. When she finally turned with 2 bowls of stew, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the field they had just plowed. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. He had a strong profile, a scar along his jaw, and hands that looked hard from work. He wore simple clothes, a shirt and trousers that had been mended more than once. Not a rich man, then. Not a drifter either from the look of him. Something in between. They ate in silence at the small table. The stew was venison, from a deer that old Mr. Patterson down the road had brought by 2 weeks ago. It was tough meat but filling. Russell ate steadily without comment, and Nora found herself studying him between bites. What happened to your husband? He asked quietly, setting down his spoon. The question caught her off guard, direct in a way that most people avoided. They tiptoed around it, offering platitudes instead of asking the truth. He was thrown from his horse 3 months ago, died instantly. The words came out flat, rehearsed. She had said them so many times they had lost all meaning. I am sorry. Everyone is sorry. She had not meant to sound bitter, but there it was. Russell nodded slowly. How much land do you have here? 40 acres. 20 in crops, the rest pasture and woodland. That is too much for one person. I know that. Nora stood abruptly, gathering the bowls. But it is what I have. Thomas and I worked 5 years to pay off this land. I am not going to give it up because things got difficult. I was not suggesting you should. Russell remained seated, watching her move about the small kitchen. I was going to say you need help. I cannot afford to hire anyone. Thomas left some money, but barely enough to see me through winter if I am careful. The man in Petaluma, the work he is offering. It is ranch hand work, seasonal. Be done by spring, and then I would need to find something else. Nora turned to face him, her hands gripping the edge of the dry sink. What are you saying? I am saying I could work for you instead. Room and board and whatever you can spare in wages. Help you get this place running proper before winter sets in hard. You do not even know me. No, madam, but I know a person in need when I see one. And I know this land is good. Worked right, it could support a family well. I am not looking for a husband, if that is what you are implying. The words came out sharper than she intended, defensive. Russell stood then, his chair scraping against the floor. He was taller than Thomas had been, she realized. Taller and broader. I am offering work for wages, Mrs. Lawson, nothing more. I am not a man who takes advantage. She studied his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives. She found none, but that did not mean they were not there. Still, the field was plowed now, something that would have taken her days to do alone, and winter was coming. The woodshed was only half full. The roof needed repairs. The fences were falling down in 3 places. 1 month, she said. Trial basis. I will give you room in the barn loft, 3 meals a day, and whatever I can spare in wages at the end of the month. If it works out, we can discuss continuing through winter. That is fair. They shook hands on it, his grip firm and calloused, and Nora wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake or answered a prayer. She had been too proud to speak aloud. Russell moved into the barn loft that evening. Nora gave him blankets and a pillow, a lamp and a basin for washing. It was not much, but he seemed satisfied. She lay awake that night in the house, listening to the sounds of the farm. An owl hooted in the distance. The wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere above the barn, a stranger was sleeping on her property, and she had no idea if she could trust him. Morning came cold and clear. Nora rose before dawn as always and went out to milk the cows. She found Russell already in the barn, mucking out stalls by lamplight. "You are up early," she said. "Habit." He did not pause in his work. "Cows are already milked. Pails are in the springhouse keeping cool." Nora stood in the barn doorway, uncertain. She had been doing this work alone for 3 months, and before that with Thomas. Having someone else here, taking care of tasks before she even woke, felt strange and unsettling. "I was going to do that," she said. "I know. But I am here now, so you do not have to." He leaned the pitchfork against the wall and turned to face her. "If we are going to make this work, Mrs. Lawson, you are going to have to let me help. That is what you are paying me for." "I am not paying you much. You are paying me enough." They fell into a routine over the following days. Russell worked from before dawn until after dark, tackling the endless list of tasks that had been piling up since Thomas's death. He repaired the fences, chopped wood until the shed was overflowing, patched the roof, and rehung the barn door that had been sagging on its hinges. He worked with a quiet intensity, speaking little but accomplishing much. Nora found herself watching him more than she should. The way his shoulders moved when he swung the axe, the careful precision of his hands when he mended a fence rail. He was good at this work, better than Thomas had been if she was honest with herself. Thomas had been a dreamer, full of plans and schemes that never quite materialized. Russell simply did what needed doing. They ate meals together at the small table, conversations gradually growing longer. She learned that he had left Nebraska after his parents died of fever, that he had been wandering for 5 years doing seasonal work, that he had never married, though he did not say why. He asked about her life before Thomas, and she told him about growing up in Sacramento, the daughter of a baker, how she had met Thomas at a dance and married him 3 weeks later because he had such beautiful dreams about farming and building a life together. "You regret it?" Russell asked one evening over supper. Marrying him, Nora considered the question carefully. No, he was a good man, kind, but farming was harder than either of us expected. We were always just barely getting by. This land could do better. You have good soil, good water. Just needs better planning. Thomas was not much for planning. Russell nodded but did not criticize, which she appreciated. It was easy to speak ill of the dead, easier still to judge a man who could not defend himself. The first month passed quickly. November arrived with frost on the ground and a bite in the air that promised snow. Russell had transformed the farm in ways Nora had not thought possible. Everything was repaired, organized, prepared for winter. The animals were thriving. Even the chickens seemed to be laying better. On the last day of the month, Nora counted out wages from the small box where she kept her money. It was less than she wanted to give him, barely enough for a man to survive on, but it was what she had promised. Russell took the money and counted it slowly. "This is too much." "It is what we agreed on. We agreed on whatever you could spare. This is more than half of what you have left in that box." Nora felt her face flush. "How did you know?" "I saw you counting it the other day through the window. Was not trying to spy, just happened to notice." He held the money out to her. "I will take half this amount and stay on through winter if you are willing. You have earned every penny of that. Maybe, but you need it more than I do. I have no use for money if you do not have food to cook or a farm to work." It was practical logic, unarguable. Nora took back half the bills and tucked them into her apron pocket. "You are a strange man, Russell Webb, so I have been told." December brought snow, light at first and then heavy, blanketing the farm in white. Nora and Russell worked side by side now, feeding animals, hauling water from the well, keeping paths clear. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. She was stronger than she had been in months, her body hardening to the work. One evening, a week before Christmas, they were sitting by the fire after supper when Russell asked, "Do you have family, Mrs. Lawson? Anyone who will come calling for the holiday? My parents are both gone. I have a sister in San Francisco, but we have not spoken in years." She disapproved of Thomas. Nora stared into the flames. "What about you?" "No one. Had a brother once, but he died young." The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with things unsaid. Nora found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way he filled the space of her small house. He was not Thomas. He was nothing like Thomas. But somewhere in the last 2 months, she had stopped comparing them. "I want to pay you properly," she said suddenly. "After the spring planting, when we can sell the crops, I want to give you a fair wage for everything you have done." Russell looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "Are you asking me to stay on past winter, if you are willing? What will people say? A widow and a single man, living on the same property." Nora had thought about this, of course. The neighbors already talked. Mrs. Hartley from the next farm over had ridden by 3 times in the past month, her eyes sharp and curious as she studied Russell working in the fields. The talk was inevitable. Let them say what they want. I know the truth, and so do you. The truth matters less than what people believe, in my experience. Then what do you suggest? Russell was quiet for a long moment. "I am suggesting that maybe we should give them something true to talk about." Nora's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" "I mean I have spent 2 months working alongside you, eating at your table, watching the way you handle everything this life throws at you. You are strong, Mrs. Lawson. Stronger than any woman I have ever known. And I find myself thinking that if I were to stay here permanent-like, it should be as more than just a hired hand." Russell. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. She had been calling him Mr. Webb for 2 months. "I am not asking you to love me," he said quietly. "I know you loved your husband. I am just saying that we work well together. We could make this farm into something good, and people would stop talking if we made it legal." It was the least romantic proposal Nora had ever heard, and yet it made perfect sense. Marriage as a business arrangement, a practical solution to practical problems. But even as she thought it, she knew it was not entirely true. Something had been growing between them, quiet as the winter snow, steady as his work on the farm. She looked forward to their evening conversations. She found herself listening for his footsteps in the morning. When he had cut his hand on a piece of wire last week, she had felt genuine fear at the sight of blood. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course. It is not a decision to make lightly." But that night, lying alone in her bed, Nora realized she had already decided. She had been deciding for weeks without admitting it to herself. Russell Webb was a good man. He worked hard. He treated her with respect. and somewhere along the way she had started to care for him in a way that had nothing to do with convenience or practicality. She told him yes the next morning over breakfast, the words simple and direct. Russell nodded, a small smile crossing his weathered face, and they shook hands like business partners sealing a deal. They married in town 2 weeks later, a brief ceremony at the courthouse with Mr. Patterson and his wife as witnesses. Nora wore her best dress, dark blue wool with buttons up the front. Russell wore a new shirt he had bought in Petaluma, stiff with starch. The judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Russell kissed her cheek with careful formality. The ride back to the farm was quiet. Nora felt strange, slightly unreal. She was a married woman again, but this time to a man she had known for less than 3 months. What had she done? Russell seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Nothing has to change," he said as they approached the house. "I can stay in the barn if you prefer. That would look odd now that we are married." "I suppose it would." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "I will follow your lead, Nora, whatever you are comfortable with." It was the first time he had used her given name. She found she liked the sound of it in his deep voice. They moved his few belongings into the house that afternoon. It was awkward at first, Russell's presence in the small bedroom that had been hers and Thomas's. But Russell was respectful, changing clothes while she was outside, staying on his side of the bed at night with space between them. The winter deepened. They worked together, ate together, slept in the same bed with careful distance between them. Nora found herself growing increasingly aware of him, of the warmth of his body in the cold nights, of the way he moved through the house as though he belonged there. Because he did belong there now. He was her husband. One night in late January, during a howling blizzard that rattled the windows and piled snow against the walls, Nora woke to find herself pressed against Russell's side, seeking warmth. She started to pull away, but his arm came around her, holding her gently. "You are cold," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "The fire must have died down. Stay here. I will build it up in a minute." But he did not move, and neither did she. Nora lay there in the darkness, listening to the storm, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. This was her husband, this good, quiet man who had taken reins from her hands without a word and somehow, impossibly, made her life better in every way. "Russell," she whispered. "Yes, I am glad I said yes." She felt rather than saw his smile. "So am I." His hand came up to stroke her hair, a tentative gesture, and Nora turned her face up to his in the darkness. Their first real kiss was gentle, exploratory, nothing like the passionate urgency she had known with Thomas. This was different, careful, full of questions and answers found in the touch of lips, the brush of hands. When they drew apart, Russell cupped her face in his rough palm. "I know I am not him," he said quietly. "I know I cannot replace what you lost. I do not want you to replace him. I want you to be yourself. I can do that." They made love slowly, discovering each other in the warm darkness while the storm raged outside. It was tender and awkward and right, and afterward, Nora lay in his arms feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Spring came late that year, the snow lingering into March before finally melting away. As the ground thawed, Russell began planning the year's planting with a careful attention to detail that Thomas had never possessed. He sketched maps of the fields, rotated crops to preserve soil, bargained shrewdly in town for seeds and supplies. "We should plant half in wheat, quarter in corn, and the rest in vegetables we can sell in town," he said one evening, showing her his plans. "The wheat will bring good money, the corn will feed the animals, and the vegetables will keep us through winter with extra to sell. You have thought of everything." "I have been thinking about this land since I first saw it. It has good potential, Nora. We could do well here." We. The word warmed her more than it should. They were a team now, partners in every sense. The planting was hard work, but satisfying. Nora worked alongside Russell in the fields, her hands in the soil, the sun warm on her back. She felt strong and capable. No longer the struggling widow, but a woman building something lasting. One afternoon in early April, Mrs. Hartley came calling, ostensibly to borrow sugar but clearly fishing for gossip. Nora invited her in for coffee, polite but not warm. "Your new husband is quite the worker," Mrs. Hartley observed, peering out the window to where Russell was mending fence. "Where did you say he came from?" "Nebraska originally. He was passing through when we met. How fortunate that he stopped when he did." The older woman's tone suggested anything but fortune. "Yes, it was. People in town are saying he married you for the land." Nora set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "People in town should mind their own business. Russell has worked harder than any man I have ever known, and he is a better husband than I had any right to hope for. If you have come here to spread rumors, Mrs. Hartley, I will thank you to leave." The woman's face flushed. "I meant no offense." "Of course you did. But I will give you the truth anyway. I married Russell because he is a good man and because I care for him. Whatever else people want to believe is their concern, not mine." After Mrs. Hartley left in a huff, Russell came in from the fields, raising an eyebrow at Nora's expression. "Trouble?" "Just the usual small-minded gossip. Nothing to worry about." He crossed to her, tipping her chin up with gentle fingers. "Does it bother you what they say?" "No, let them talk. I know what we have." "And what do we have, Nora?" She smiled, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Something real." The crops grew tall and green under Russell's careful tending. By summer, the fields were the envy of the neighboring farms, thick with wheat and corn. They worked from dawn to dusk, but the evenings were theirs, spent sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, talking about the future. "We should get more cattle," Russell said one evening. "Expand the herd. The pasture land is good and there is a market for beef in Petaluma." "That would take money." "The wheat harvest should be good. We could use some of that." Nora leaned against his shoulder, content. "When did you become such a planner?" "I have always been a planner. Just never had anything worth planning for before." "And now you do." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "Now I have everything." The harvest came in better than expected. They worked alongside hired hands from town, cutting wheat from dawn to dusk, their backs aching but their spirits high. When the final tally was done, Russell showed Nora the numbers with barely concealed excitement. "This is enough to buy 10 more head of cattle and still have money left for winter supplies. Then we should do it." They bought the cattle at auction in Petaluma, good stock that would breed well. Russell hired a young man named Charlie to help with the expanded work, a quiet 18-year-old who reminded Nora of how Russell must have been at that age. Charlie slept in the barn loft and ate meals with them, listening to Russell's instructions with careful attention. One evening in late September, as they were cleaning up after supper, Nora felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the edge of the table, waiting for it to pass. "Nora, are you all right?" Russell was at her side immediately, his hand at her elbow. "Just tired. It has been a long day." But the dizziness came again the next morning and the next. By the end of the week, Nora knew what it meant. She had felt this way before, years ago, before losing a baby in the 4th month of her pregnancy with Thomas. She had never told him she was expecting, too afraid after the miscarriage to speak of it. Now, sitting on the edge of the bed, she pressed a hand to her still flat stomach and tried to calm her racing heart. She was pregnant. Russell's child. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She told him that evening after Charlie had gone to bed in the barn. Russell was sitting by the fire, reviewing accounts when she said simply, "I am going to have a baby." His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You are certain as I can be. I felt this way before, years ago." She swallowed hard. "I lost that baby. I never told Thomas I was expecting." Russell set aside the account book and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "How far along were you when you lost it?" "4 months." "And how far along are you now?" "Maybe 6 weeks. It is hard to say." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "We will take care of you. No more working in the fields. You will rest." "I cannot just stop working, Russell. There is too much to do." "Then I will hire more help. Charlie and I can handle the farm work." "You focus on staying healthy." Nora wanted to argue, but the fear was too strong. She had lost one baby already. She could not bear to lose another. The pregnancy progressed slowly. Nora spent the fall and winter resting as much as she could, though she still handled the cooking and lighter chores. Russell was attentive to the point of being overprotective, fussing over her diet and insisting she stay warm and avoid anything strenuous. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of eggs. "I know, but I am not taking any chances." "Russell, you cannot protect me from everything." "I can try." Christmas came and went quietly. They were snowed in for a week in January, just the 3 of them on the farm. Charlie turned out to be good company, with a dry sense of humor that sometimes made Nora laugh until her sides ached. He and Russell worked together seamlessly, and Nora was grateful for the help. By February, she was showing clearly, her body rounding with new life. Russell would rest his hand on her belly at night, feeling for movement, his face full of wonder when the baby kicked. "You want a boy or a girl?" She asked him one night. "I want a healthy baby and a healthy wife, that is all. But if you could choose," he considered for a moment. "A boy would be useful on the farm, but a girl would be a blessing. Either way, I will love this child. You will be a good father." "I hope so." "I have no experience with children." "Neither do I, really. We will figure it out together." The baby came in early May, on a morning when the fields were green with new growth and the air smelled of fresh earth and flowers. The labor was long and difficult. Russell sent Charlie to fetch the midwife from town, and then he stayed with Nora, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. "I cannot do this," she gasped during a particularly hard contraction. "You can. You are the strongest person I know. I am frightened. I am here. I am not going anywhere." The midwife arrived and took charge, barking orders at Russell, who obeyed without question. The pain seemed endless, wave after wave, until finally, in the late afternoon, a baby's cry split the air. "A boy," the midwife announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. A big, healthy boy. Russell's face when he held his son for the first time was something Nora would never forget. Pure joy mixed with terror, love and responsibility all tangled together. He brought the baby to her, placing the small bundle carefully in her arms. "He is perfect," Nora whispered, studying the tiny face, the shock of dark hair, the small fists waving. "Just like his mother." They named him James Thomas Webb, honoring both Russell's dead brother and Nora's first husband. It felt right, a bridge between past and present. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, with Russell's gray eyes and Nora's dark hair. Russell proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, rocking James to sleep while humming old songs from his childhood. Charlie, who had been worried about being in the way, turned out to be helpful with the baby, entertaining James with silly faces and offering to watch him so Nora could rest. The farm continued to thrive under Russell's management. And by James's first birthday, they had expanded the cattle herd again and were planning to build a larger barn. One evening in late summer, with James asleep in his cradle and the last light fading from the sky, Nora and Russell sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "You ever think about how we met?" Nora asked. "All the time. I was just going to ride past. I almost did, but something made me stop." "I am glad you did. So am I." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I love you, Nora. I do not think I have ever said it properly, but I do. I have loved you for a long time now." Nora turned to look at him, this quiet man who had changed her life so completely. "I love you too. I think I have since that first day when you took the reins without a word. You saw what I needed and you gave it, no questions asked. That is who you are. I just wanted to help. You did more than help. You saved me, not just the farm, but me." Russell pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "We saved each other." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and hard work and love. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to care for the animals and work the land. When he was 3, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a tiny, fierce little thing with her mother's determination. 2 years later came another son, Daniel, sweet-tempered and thoughtful. Charlie eventually left to start his own farm, but he visited often, bringing his young wife to meet the family. The farm continued to prosper, growing beyond anything Nora had imagined in those dark days after Thomas's death. They built a new house, larger and more comfortable, and a barn that was the finest in the county. Neighbors who had once gossiped now spoke with respect. The Webbs were good people, hard workers, the kind of family that made a community strong. Nora and Russell were invited to dinners, to dances, to church socials. They were part of the fabric of life around Petaluma now, no longer outsiders. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Russell took Nora into town for dinner at the hotel, a rare luxury. They left the children with Mrs. Patterson, who had become a good friend over the years and dressed in their finest clothes. Over roast beef and potatoes, Russell raised his glass. "To my wife, who took a chance on a drifter in the rain. To my husband, who saw what needed doing and did it." They clinked glasses, smiling at each other across the table. Nora looked at Russell and saw the gray at his temples now, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was 40 years old, still strong but no longer young. She was 34, a mother of 3, her hands roughened from work but her heart full. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Stopping that day instead of riding on to Petaluma, not for a single moment. Do you regret letting me take those reins? It was the best decision I ever made. Even though I was a stranger. Especially because you were a stranger. You saw me as I was, not as someone's widow or someone's wife, just a woman who needed help." Russell reached across the table to take her hand. "You were never just anything, Nora. From the first moment I saw you, fighting that mule in the rain, I knew you were extraordinary." "I did not feel extraordinary. I felt desperate and alone. That is when people show their true character. You could have given up, sold the farm, moved to town, but you did not. You fought. I would have lost that fight without you. Maybe, but you would have gone down swinging." They laughed together, easy and comfortable, the laugh of 2 people who knew each other completely. After dinner, they walked through town hand in hand, looking in shop windows, talking about nothing and everything. "James is asking about learning to break horses," Russell said. "He is only 8, but he has a good way with animals. That terrifies me, I know. But he is going to do it eventually. Better to teach him young, teach him right, than have him try it on his own when he is older. You are right, I just worry. That is what parents do." They stopped at the edge of town, looking out over the valley where their farm lay in the distance, a small cluster of buildings nestled among the rolling hills. Somewhere in that house, their children were sleeping, safe and loved. Somewhere in those fields, crops were growing, cattle were grazing. It was a life built from nothing, from a chance encounter in the rain and a decision to take a risk. "I want more children," Nora said suddenly. Russell turned to her, surprised. "You do? Maybe one or two more. I love our family, Russell. I want it to grow. Then we will grow it." And they did. Another daughter came 2 years later, Alice, with blonde hair that seemed to come from nowhere until Russell remembered his mother had been fair. Then, to everyone's surprise, twins arrived when Nora was 38, two more boys they named Samuel and Henry. The house was full to bursting with noise and chaos and love. James grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility on the farm. He was 17 when he started courting the minister's daughter, a sweet girl named Emma who made him laugh. Rose was 14, already beautiful and stubborn as her mother, with a head for numbers that suggested she would manage the farm's business affairs someday. Daniel, at 12, was the gentle one, preferring books to manual labor but willing to do his share. Alice was 10, a little mother to her younger brothers. The twins, at 5, were a matched pair of mischief and energy. Russell, now in his late 40s, had slowed down slightly but was still the hardest worker Nora knew. His hair was more gray than dark now, and he wore reading glasses when he went over the accounts, but he was healthy and strong. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset, surrounded by the sounds of their children playing in the yard, Russell said, "I have been thinking about expanding into the cattle business more seriously. Build up a real operation, maybe start breeding horses too. That would be a lot of work. James could help. He is good with horses, just like you said he would be. And Daniel might come around to the physical work if it involves animals." Nora watched her sons playing in the dirt, building some elaborate game that involved sticks and rocks. "Do you ever miss it? The wandering life before you settled down?" "Not for a moment. This is what I was looking for all those years, I just did not know it. A home, a family, purpose. You found all that in a muddy field in the rain. I found you. Everything else came from that." Nora leaned into his shoulder, content. 20 years had passed since that October morning when Russell Webb had taken the reins from her hands without a word. 20 years of hard work and growth, of children and crops, of building a life from the ground up. They had faced challenges, drought years and sick animals, the death of friends and the birth of grandchildren when James and Emma married and had a baby girl. Through it all, Russell had been her constant, her partner, her love. The quiet cowboy who had stopped to help a struggling widow had become everything to her. Not because he had swept her off her feet with romantic gestures or flowery words, but because he had shown up every day and done the work. Because he had been steady and true. Because he had seen her, truly seen her, and chosen to stay. The sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the sky like a promise. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless tasks that came with running a farm and raising a family. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything for the past 20 years. "I love you," Nora said softly. "I love you too," Russell replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. In the yard, James called for his younger siblings to come in for supper. Rose appeared in the doorway behind them, announcing that the food was ready. The twins ran up the porch steps, dirty and grinning. Alice followed more sedately, already trying to act grown up. Daniel brought up the rear, carrying a book he had been reading under a tree. This was their life. Full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but good. So very good. Years continued to pass in the way they do, each one bringing change but also continuity. James took over more and more of the farm operations, working alongside his father with easy competence. He and Emma had 3 children, making Nora and Russell grandparents 3 times over. Rose shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to go to school in San Francisco to learn business and accounting. Russell supported her decision despite the neighbors clucking about how improper it was for a young woman. "Let them talk," he said. "Rose has a good head for numbers. She should use it." Rose came home 2 years later with a degree and promptly reorganized the farm's entire financial system, increasing their profits by 20% in the first year. She eventually married a banker from Petaluma, a quiet man named William who respected her intelligence and ambition. Daniel surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in town where he taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to children from the surrounding farms. He never married, content with his books and his students, but he was a beloved uncle to all the nieces and nephews. Alice married young, at 18, to a rancher's son. They moved to Southern California where they raised horses. The twins, inseparable as always, went into business together buying and selling cattle, traveling all over California and making a name for themselves as shrewd but honest dealers. Through all these changes, Nora and Russell remained at the center, the anchor around which the family revolved. The farm continued to thrive, now one of the most successful in the county. They employed several full-time hands and owned over 200 acres, expanded from the original 40 through careful purchases over the years. On a spring morning in 1893, 20 years after that fateful day in the rain, Nora stood in the same field where she and Russell had first met. She was 44 now, her dark hair shot through with gray, her face lined from years in the sun. But she was happy, deeply and truly happy in a way she had never imagined possible in those dark days after Thomas's death. Russell came walking across the field toward her, moving more slowly now at 50 but still strong. He had a halter in his hand, coming from checking on a mare that was due to foal any day. "What are you doing out here?" he called, just remembering. He reached her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Remembering what? The day we met. I was right here, fighting with that old mule, and you came riding up and just took over without asking. I was worried you would be dragged. I probably would have been. You saved me that day." Russell shook his head. "We have been over this. We saved each other. I know, but I am allowed to be grateful." They stood together in the field, looking out over the land they had built together. The original house was still standing, used now as a guest cottage when family came to visit. The new house was large and comfortable, filled with grandchildren on weekends. The barns were well maintained, the fences strong, the crops promising. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had just ridden on to Petaluma that day?" Nora asked. "Sometimes. I would have taken that ranch hand job, worked it for a season, moved on to something else. Never would have had any of this. I would have probably lost the farm, moved to town, taken in sewing or laundry, lived a small, quiet life. Instead we have this. Instead we have everything." Russell turned to face her, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. Even after 20 years, his touch could still make her heart skip. "I would do it all again. Every moment, every choice. It has all led here to you, to our family. I regret nothing. Neither do I." They kissed, soft and familiar, two people who had grown old together and were grateful for every moment. When they pulled apart, Russell rested his forehead against hers. "Come on," he said. "Let us go check on that mare. James said she was showing signs this morning." Hand in hand, they walked across their field toward the barns. Behind them, the plowed earth stretched out in neat rows, ready for planting. Ahead, their family waited, spread across California but always coming home. This land, this life, had grown from a single moment of connection in the rain. As they reached the barn, they could hear the mare whickering softly. James was already there, kneeling in the straw beside her. "She is foaling," he said, looking up with excitement. "It is coming fast." Russell and Nora knelt beside their son, helping as the new life entered the world. It was a colt, long-legged and perfect, struggling to stand on shaky legs within minutes of birth. They all laughed as it wobbled and fell, then tried again, determined. "Look at him go," James said proudly. "He is going to be a strong one." "Just like his father," Russell said, running a hand over the mare's neck. "Good girl. You did well." They stayed with the horses until they were sure both mother and baby were healthy and comfortable. Then James headed back to his own family for supper, and Russell and Nora walked to their house as the sun began to set. Inside, the house was quiet for once, all the children grown and gone to their own lives. It was just the two of them now, most of the time, and Nora found she did not mind. She had loved raising their family, but there was something peaceful about this new phase of life. They ate a simple supper of soup and bread, talking about the day's work and plans for tomorrow. After the dishes were washed, they sat together by the fire, Russell reading the newspaper and Nora working on some mending. "There is a dance in town next week," Russell said, looking up from the paper. "For the spring festival, we should go. We have not been dancing in years." "Then we are overdue," Nora smiled. "All right, but do not blame me if I step on your toes. I am out of practice. I will take my chances." The dance was lovely, the whole town turning out to celebrate spring. Nora wore her best dress, deep green silk that Rose had brought back from San Francisco. Russell wore his Sunday suit, looking handsome despite the gray hair and the slight stoop to his shoulders from years of hard work. They danced together, moving easily despite Nora's protests about being out of practice. It felt natural, familiar, like everything else in their life together. "Do you remember our wedding dance?" Nora asked as they swayed to the music. "You were terrified." "I was. I had just married a man I barely knew. And now I cannot imagine my life without you." Russell pulled her closer, his cheek against her hair. "Best decision I ever made, stopping that day. Best decision I ever made letting you." They stayed late at the dance, talking with friends and neighbors, watching the young people courting and the children running wild. This was their community now, their home in a way that nowhere else had ever been. Driving back to the farm in the wagon, Nora leaned against Russell's shoulder, tired but content. The stars were bright overhead, the air sweet with the smell of spring flowers. "I have been thinking," Russell said as they approached the house. "Maybe we should take a trip, go see Alice in Southern California. We have never been down there." "That would be nice. When were you thinking?" "Maybe this summer, after the planting is done. James can manage things here for a few weeks. Then let us do it. An adventure." At our age, any trip is an adventure. They laughed together, and Nora thought about how much life they had lived together. From that desperate morning in the rain to this peaceful evening returning home, it had been a journey beyond anything she could have imagined. The trip to Southern California happened in July. They took the train, a new experience for both of them, and spent 3 weeks visiting Alice and her family. It was good to see their daughter thriving, to meet grandchildren they had only heard about in letters. But it was even better to come home, to see the familiar hills and the farm spread out below as they drove up from town. James had done well in their absence and the crops were flourishing. "It is good to get away," Russell said as they unpacked, "but it is better to come home." Agreed. The seasons turned as they always did. Autumn brought harvest, winter brought rest, spring brought planting, summer brought growth. The cycle continued, steady and predictable, shaped by hard work and love. Nora was 50 when Russell had his first health scare, a pain in his chest that sent them rushing to the doctor in Petaluma. It turned out to be nothing serious, just strain from overdoing the work, but it frightened them both. Russell was 56, not a young man anymore, and Nora realized with a start that they would not live forever. "You need to slow down," she told him firmly. "Let James handle more of the physical work. I am fine." "You are not fine. You scared me half to death. Promise me you will take it easier." Russell pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I promise. I am not ready to leave you, Nora. We have too much left to do." "Like what?" "Like watch our grandchildren grow up. Like celebrate our 25th anniversary next year. Like grow old and gray together. You are already gray. So are you." They smiled at each other, and Nora felt the fear recede. They would have more time. They had to. Russell did slow down after that, taking on more of the supervisory work and letting James and the hired hands handle the heavy labor. It frustrated him at first, this acknowledgement of age, but he adjusted. There was still plenty to do, planning and organizing and managing. Their 25th anniversary came on a cold December day. The children planned a party, all of them coming home with their families. The house was full to bursting with noise and laughter and love. James stood up to make a toast. "To my parents, who taught us what real love looks like. Not the fairy tale kind, but the everyday kind. The kind that shows up and does the work. The kind that lasts." Everyone raised their glasses, and Nora felt tears prick her eyes. When had her oldest son become so wise? The grandchildren performed a play they had written about how their grandparents met, complete with someone pretending to be a mule and a dramatic rain scene using a watering can. It was ridiculous and touching, and made everyone laugh. Later, when the house had finally quieted and everyone was asleep, Nora and Russell sat by the fire in their room. 25 years, Nora said softly. "It feels like a lifetime and like yesterday all at once." "I know what you mean." Russell took her hand, studying it. Her fingers were gnarled now from arthritis, the skin spotted with age. But to him, she was still beautiful. "I would marry you again tomorrow if I could. I would say yes again. Even knowing everything that was coming, all the hard work and worry and struggle, especially knowing all that. Because I would also know about the joy and the love and the family we built. I would know that every challenge was worth it." Russell kissed her hand gently. "You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "Right back at you, Cowboy." He laughed at the old nickname. She had not called him that in years. "I am not much of a cowboy anymore, more of a gentleman farmer. You will always be the cowboy who took the reins from me in the rain, and you will always be the strongest woman I know." More years passed, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost friends to age and illness. They celebrated the marriages of grandchildren and the births of great-grandchildren. The farm continued to prosper under James's management, and Rose's business acumen kept them financially secure. Russell's health declined slowly. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down of a body that had worked hard for 6 decades. He needed a cane to walk by his 60th birthday, and his hearing was going. But his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Nora never wavered. Nora fared better physically, but felt every one of her 56 years. Her hands hurt from the arthritis, and her back ached if she stood too long. But she was content. She had lived a full life, richer than she ever dreamed possible. One spring evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Russell said quietly, "I want you to know that if something happens to me, you will be taken care of. James knows how to run the farm. Rose has all the financial records organized. The other children are settled and doing well. You will be all right. Russell, do not talk like that. I am 62 years old, Nora. We have to talk about these things. Not yet, we have more time. I hope so. But if we do not, I need you to know you gave me the best years of my life. Every single day with you has been a gift. Nora felt tears streaming down her face. You cannot leave me. I will not allow it. I am not planning on it. I am just saying when the time comes, do not grieve too long. You have so much life left to live. Without you, it would not be living. Russell pulled her close, and they sat together as the sky darkened and the stars emerged. The same stars they had watched together for nearly 30 years, constants in a changing world. But Russell was tougher than he looked. He lived to see his 65th birthday, then his 70th. Nora celebrated her own 70th birthday surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The farm was thriving under the third generation now, with James's oldest son taking on more responsibility. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered again. The original farmhouse, where Nora and Russell had lived those first years, was now a museum of sorts, filled with mementos and photographs documenting the family history. Someone had found the old plow that Nora had been fighting with that rainy day, and it sat in a place of honor in the barn. 40 years, Rose said, shaking her head in wonder. That is an amazing achievement. The achievement was not staying married, Russell said, his voice weaker now but still steady. The achievement was building a life worth living together. The party was smaller and quieter than the 25th anniversary had been, more fitting for two people in their 70s. But it was no less full of love. That night, lying in bed together, Nora and Russell talked quietly about the past. You remember being young? Nora asked. Barely. It feels like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago, a whole life lived together. Russell's hand found hers in the darkness. If I could go back and give my younger self advice, do you know what I would say? What? Stop when you see a woman in need. Take the reins. Stay. That is good advice. I thought so. They fell asleep holding hands the way they had for 40 years. Russell lived to be 74. He died peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, lying beside Nora in the bed they had shared for 4 decades. She woke in the morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, one hand still resting on hers. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But Nora was surrounded by family, by the life they had built together, and that helped. James took care of the funeral arrangements. Rose handled the legal matters. The other children came with their families, filling the house with the noise of living. At the funeral, Nora stood beside the grave and told the gathered crowd about the day they met. He was just a stranger passing through. He could have ridden on. Instead, he stopped. He saw what needed doing and he did it. That was Russell. He showed up. He did the work. He loved completely, and he made my life infinitely better for being in it. She lived another 8 years without him, surrounded by family but lonely in a way she had not been since before they met. She spent her days in the garden, playing with great-grandchildren, telling stories about the old days. But she never forgot the feel of Russell's hand taking those reins from hers, the quiet confidence in his voice when he said the rain would stop soon. He had been right about so many things. The rain had stopped. The ground had been perfect for plowing, and they had built something lasting. Nora died peacefully at 82 in her sleep, just like Russell. They buried her beside him under the oak tree on the hill overlooking the farm. The headstone was simple. Nora and Russell Webb together forever. The farm continued on, passed down through generations. James's grandchildren worked the land their great-grandparents had built. The story of how Nora and Russell met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings. And sometimes, on rainy October mornings, Someone working in that field would pause and remember. Remember a widow fighting a plow and a cowboy who stopped to help. Remember how a single act of kindness, offered without expectation of return, had bloomed into a love that shaped generations. Remember that the best things in life often come from the simplest choices, from showing up and doing what needs to be done. The field remained fertile, the crops grew tall, and the family prospered. All because one day, long ago, a cowboy took the reins without a word and changed two lives forever.